Welcome back to another episode of Kicking It with
That
Coach
was
Red, where we bring you all the news, stories, takes, and opinions about your favorite teams from the Pacific North, fresh from the good
oh
to the bad to the Seahawks? Question mark.
uh okay. The not so sweet Seahawks throwing a curveball at me. Football season.
Welcome
Jeez.
to quick post game breakdown and quick betting line. The line was brought to you by our friends over at DraftKings. If you picked the over under of 3 beers before this podcast and you hammered the under, well, guess what? You lost yourself a whole lot of money.
Actually, I had one.
Well, and I had five. So still, if we average that out, that's six. You would at least push. There we go. I was hoping for under three to lead you guys to the promised land, but guess what? Let's get a little bit wild. Let's get a little bit weird. So,
Yep.
before we get into the Seahawks game on Thursday night, why don't I tell you a little bit about us? If you're looking for a guy that is as fired up as Fernando Tatis Jr. off of a pimp job home run in the playoffs, then you're looking for a guy like me, your boy Coach Red. You can find me over on X at the real Coach Red, on Instagram at the real underscore Coach Red, TikTok at the real Coach Red. Also, find the show over on YouTube. Search Kicking It with Coach Red. Like, subscribe, hit the bell notifications, and leave a comment or two. And if you are looking for a guy that is disappointed, just so
Oh.
disappointed that you might call him a Mariners fan. And if you're
Oh.
looking for a guy like that, you're looking for a guy like Cain.
Yeah, I'm always disappointed. There's always sad times here. Yeah, I'm Kane. You can find me over on Twitter at Kane2406, TikTok Kane0624. Also follow the show's socials over on Twitter and Instagram at Coach Red Pod. False. Do it, freaking do it. Okay, let's dive into this
Okay, let me
horrendous
dive
game.
into the score. Seahawks lose Thursday night football against division rivals to go even with them in the standings atop the NFC North, but actually the Seahawks would probably be slightly below them due to tiebreakers. They lose the game 36-24. And at halftime, this game was a mollywop, right? You're sitting
Yeah.
there down 16-3. Seahawks had an opportunity, very close chance to score a touchdown right before half. Seahawks jump out in the third quarter, score 14. San Francisco only scores 7. You're feeling pretty solid about this. Uncle Mo's got in the building. Momentum is turning, but San Francisco scores 13 in the final quarter to the Seahawks 7 to get that 36-24 score. And this game just had so many ups and downs, right?
Yes.
The defense in the first half, I thought did their job outside of the long Debo touchdown, the big shot play. San Francisco was in the red zone multiple times, and the Seahawks defense bent, but they didn't break. And I wrote some notes early on, but then I got really tired of writing them. So here's my notes from the Seahawks first drive. Seahawks first drive, they weren't very effective running the ball. And that was one of the keys that they had talked about all this week. I had joked with you pregame about the funniest thing is what if they just come out and don't run the ball at all? Heavy screen game, get involved. In the screen game actually worked pretty decently today. There were
Yep.
some ones that went for a couple of yards, but quite a few popped for 5 to 10, right? So good things seen in that. But there was a big yak play on the first third down, but they were going run, pass, run, pass, run, pass. And as you got down the field, Geno, they're in field goal range, and Geno throws seeing ghosts a little bit, doesn't have his feet set. Ball comes high. Ball was high the whole first half, if
Yeah,
we're being
he
completely
he
honest.
could not hit a receiver
No, and you had JSN early for a first down
and more.
and a few other ones. But what I said is bad interception that took 3 off the board. So that's 3 points that could have went the Seahawks way that didn't very early because of an ill-advised throw by Geno. And when you looked at that first drive for the Niners, it was just death by a million paper cuts, in my opinion, because
Yep.
it was just barely getting a first down. They had a couple of chunk plays, and then they bend, but they don't break. They once it gets into the red zone, when it gets into really toughening up time, the Seahawks did what we saw the first couple of weeks, which was get really strong in the red zone.
Mhm.
And when we get into the stats, I'm not going to break down the defense super heavy like I typically do. But for the most part, throughout this game, the Seahawks defense did what was needed to win the game,
Yep.
except for late, right? Because they
Right.
had that big play by Garendo, run in by Juszczyk. There was a turnover, or not even a turnover, but they got the ball deep. And it was just a big frustration bomb, right? But when you look at what Seahawks did throughout the course of first quarter, sans the Debo 75-yard touchdown through the third quarter, the defense was doing what you expected them to do.
Mhm.
I expected them a little bit more to get a sack on Brock Purdy. I expected them to force a turnover. I think if the Seahawks forced a turnover in this game or sacked Brock Purdy one time, maybe three times max, we could be looking at a different outcome to this game.
It also does not help when both of your special teams guy bottle a kickoff or two kickoffs in back-to-back drives,
Yeah, there
because you
was,
had D. Williams have the bobble right in front of the end zone.
well, the
Can't
ball
take a
didn't
knee.
touch him in play. It bounced in the end zone. It was
No,
awkward.
he touched it right before, so he had to pick it up and run it out because he can't take a knee for a safety.
D
And then you have
Williams, D Williams has got to work on his hands because they got extremely lucky on the punt that did touch his hand. That
yeah,
probably would have been overturned, but they talked about it on the broadcast that they did not have that super enhanced look when they were looking at it back in New York, which boggles my mind, right? It didn't look like it was close, but guess what? It was.
yeah, and then you had Laviska Shenault on the next kickoff take a nosedive and the ball gets punched out.
That was the big turnaround that caused that early score that I was talking about. But
Yeah.
Laviska Chenault redeemed himself with
Yes, with
a
the
kickoff return for a
that was
touchdown.
awesome.
The Seahawks get a 3-and-out. Then they go down and score another touchdown. And you're thinking, Uncle Mo, momentum is now on your side. You're ready to roll. But
Mhm.
before we go into the bigger breakdown, let's talk some stats. Geno Smith on the day. Happy birthday, Geno Smith. 30 for 52, 312 yards, one touchdown, and two interceptions. The rushing attack, yes, they did run the ball more than 7 times in this game. They ran it for 19 for a grand total of running backs for 52 yards. K9 had 14 for 32 with the touchdown. Zach Charbonnet, 5 for 20 yards. The receivers, they really did get, there was no real standout in this game. There was a whole lot of distribution by Geno. It was pretty lackluster in the first half until that late drive. And then they really started getting humming there in the third quarter. And then the fourth quarter was kind of hit or miss. You had Tyler Lockett, 4 catches, 65 yards with a touchdown. You had Noah Fant, my guy that I said was going to be have a sneaky good game, 6 catches for 63 yards. JSN, 5 catches for 53. DK, 3 catches for 48. K9, surprising stat of the day, 8 catches
Yep.
for 37 yards.
Dad was feasting in fantasy this week.
Yeah, and then I've got the defense. I did highlight 2 stats here: 0 sacks, 0 picks.
Yeah. That it didn't matter if they got through, Purdy got around it.
Most of the time, scrambled
Right.
or threw it away.
And I mean, he was making smart moves. Played a clean game. He played a good game. And there's nothing you could really say about that except, you got Boye Mafe back. And excuse me, why is he dropping back in coverage?
I think that the main thing that I took away from this game is although Boye Mafe and Derek Hall both played in this game, they weren't at 100% because they
No.
obviously would have got after Brock Purdy and sat him down on the turf. Leonard Williams, I thought, played a pretty solid game. He
for
did
the
have
most
some big
part.
run stops. He did cause some havoc on the inside. Jaron Reed was pretty quiet in this game. Dotson made some plays. I thought that Julian Love, this is one of the better games that he had played.
Jerome Baker played an all right game
Yeah,
as
I thought Jerome
well.
Baker was good. I thought that Spoon was up and down. One person I want to give, I'll let you give props to one person. I know who you're going to give it to.
Artie Burns. Artie Burns.
But I'm going to give
Every
some props to
time,
Nehemiah
man.
Pritchett because you had Trey Brown go down in the third quarter. And actually, Nehemiah Pritchett was in there in a couple of
Yep. Big time
pass
plays.
breakups. And he really owned that moment. And when you look at this team going forward, you've got that mini break, right? You've got the 10 days until you play it again. So they had 3 games in 10 days. Now they get a 10-day break, which I think is going to be key for this team to get a little bit more healthy and
Yep.
really propel themselves into that next phase of the season, right? They went on a
Mm.
3-game win streak to start the season. Now they're on a 3-game losing streak. And it's tough. You do have a first year head coach. You have a first time offensive coordinator. You have a first time defensive
And
coordinator.
you have a lot of guys that haven't ever worked together in the league. I mean, I believe Mike MacDonald knew 4 people going into this, and the rest of the crew is new.
Yeah, they're
And
gelling. And you thought it was pretty good during the beginning, but you were facing favorable matchups. You were facing some things that you should win those games.
and even the Lions game, it was a great game despite the score, right? Because they
Well,
razzled and dazzled in the
it was
second half.
it was a great game. I think there was no despite the score because the score was tight the whole game, right?
Right. But it wasn't a loss where you're just frustrated and just you were
No, we
at
were
peace with.
excited.
Right, because it was like, damn, it's another shootout with the Lions, and Geno played great on Monday night, but we come to a Thursday night after back to back tough losses, and then you come into this game, uh, coming off of Sunday's loss, you had multiple guys saying, "Oh yeah, we were just kind of locked in for Thursday." We were locked in for
You weren't,
Thursday. You
especially the
don't
first half.
you don't say that. Play each week. I get it. It's the Niners,
That's
right?
why we talk trap game.
Right. Like it's so frustrating to hear these players and no the defense was good, right? But there's still a lot of blown coverages. Like on that Debo touchdown. Boye Mafe is covering in zone.
Corner bit up. Boye Mafe's going back. You've got Julian Love that's trying to make a hero play. I think that I don't even know what I was thinking because when you look at that in slow mo, like he wasn't going for the ball. I don't know why he wasn't just going to plaster Debo, right? Because
Yeah.
he's in a position to do it. Boye Mafe gets close enough to tracking him down, but Debo
And that
Samuel's
was
gonna outrun Boye Mafe,
crazy.
right?
And yeah, but it's just these blown coverage plays, and they're still playing this weird zone.
Here's some things that I do want to touch on, especially with the Seahawks offense. You had Tre'Davious Ward out of this game. You had Mufasa
Yeah.
Mustafa in for Fuaga, right? Or
He goes
Hufunga.
down in
So he
this he
goes
goes
down.
down in the
So you've
second.
got a very depleted secondary. This is time for like your offense to start cooking, and they did at times, but they didn't do it consistently. This
No.
is a secondary that by the time you got into the second half, you should have feasted against. DK Metcalf is visibly frustrated. Tyler Lockett had 1 target in the first half,
Yep.
and JSN got a couple of balls there. The one thing that is a little bit frustrating right now with Geno Smith as a whole is he kind of gets locked onto dudes, and you saw it on the last drive or the second to last drive. Bobo. JSN had 2 drives that was all JSN. You saw Tyler Lockett have his drive. He's got to get more comfortable with distributing. The kind of guy that was more consistent throughout the game was kind of Noah Fant. He kind of was that sprinkle, that little sauce, and K9
Yep.
catching the ball. You've got to be able to distribute the ball and not log on to guys,
I
especially
mean,
with this offensive line. Even though Geno suffered one sack tonight, he was under pressure quite a bit. He was
yeah,
seeing ghosts from the week before, from the 7 sack performance. And when you get into that mindset, it's tough to break it. And that's what we saw the full first half.
yeah,
Realistically, he settled down once you hit the third quarter, but then the fourth quarter, the ghost had returned. I know that
yeah.
we're getting
He's
into spooky season. We're in October, but just pretend it's Casper the Friendly Ghost, buddy. Like it'll be
yeah.
fine.
It it really does get tough because it is, in desperate situations, he does target DK and he targets him in absurd amounts sometimes. Don't get me wrong,
He
that's our
didn't
guy.
today.
He did early. He did early.
He did a little bit early, but he was missing people so bad because he had happy feet. He had
Yeah.
happy feet and everything was going high.
And I think okay, if we're talking about Geno, do you want to bring up the thing we had where you said we might have to have a conversation now?
Well, I think we are going to have a conversation because you've got a long week coming up before you play at Atlanta,
And
going into the dirty South.
that's gonna be a tough game too.
And Atlanta is kind of a tough team to peg, just like the Seahawks. I think they're very similar because I think their defenses are adequate and their offenses are a little bit of an enigma at time. They can get hot and catch fire. I think you could say that about both teams so far through 6 games for the Seahawks and 5 games for the Falcons. But Geno Smith on the year. Going into this game, he led the league in pass attempts and yards thrown. Geno Smith coming out of this game, before the game, he was 5 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. He's now sitting at 6 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. That is awfully close. We're getting real close to back to
Last
that's
year.
backup territory because
Yeah.
usually what you see with a backup quarterback in the NFL is equal interceptions to touchdowns. They typically will not lose you games, but they also won't win you games. And I think that when you look at the slate that you had at the beginning of the season, they were all very winnable games. And then once you got to the tough stretch, you had the Lions, which I think was going to be a battle. They should have 100% won that game against the Giants. And then you go into a division battle against a Niners team that has given up late scores
Yeah.
and has not played up to their potential, even with the slew of injuries that they've had. But when you look at this, I think that this brain trust group for the Hawks do have to really evaluate because after this year, you have no guaranteed money to Geno.
Yep.
Is it time to start incorporating Sam Howell into this offense?
I think so. Because there's one thing here I want to touch on too that's later in season. You have a very, very, very tough stretch at the end of the year with Arizona, the rest of the NFC North. And I'm throwing all of those defenses are spectacular. They've all performed well for most of the year. Bears defense is good. Minnesota's playing otherworldly on defense right now. Green Bay also has a good defense. But then the Arizona Cardinals have been stifling people as well. So that's going to be a tough stretch at the end of the year. And I don't know how well Geno's going to play for the rest of the year.
Well, I think that you really have to look at this when you look at the dollars and cents of everything. Like you have Sam Howell for 2 more years. He was a late round pick, so he gets that 4 year contract. He's
Mm-hmm.
done 2 years in Washington, and now this is year 3. So going into next year, you're really going to have to look at this team and say, is Geno going to be the guy going forward? Because if he is, you're going to get the uptick in salary, and that's going to limit what you can do to add other pieces to this team. And I wish this wasn't a conversation that we're having here after 6 games through the season, but I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. Last year,
And
Sam
let's
Howell, although he had his ups and downs, if you can limit the turnovers, because he played like a backup quarterback at times last year. He had some very prolific games. When you looked at the Seahawks versus the Commanders last year, it was one of Sam Howell's best games. Also, at
Right.
that time, the Seahawks defense was below subpar,
Yeah,
but
and when you look at
he's got the
Washington
arm
this
talent.
year too, they're a completely different team to what they were last year. So, you know, maybe get Sam Howell those reps. Get him in there a little bit more because at some point Mike MacDonald's going to have to sit down and really think. I know Geno's my
Well,
guy,
you've
but
got to look towards the future, right? Because Geno is your guy, but there's no guaranteed money after this year. So, do you look towards Sam Howell that is going to be less expensive? You can cut that money out. You can go get some of those defensive players to help ramp up this team. You can look at some offensive players to help ramp up this team, right? You're going to be in this awkward situation. I think that what we're seeing right now is it's a lot of introspective looking at this. How much longer is Geno Smith for this team? I think Tyler Lockett's kind of on his last leg. So is it time to start incorporating Bobo a little bit more and JSN a little bit more and really getting them into the game plan? I would really love to see this team get into a mode. And I said this at the when they were struggling offensively in the first half, when they started to get some things, I go, they need to come out and up tempo offense. They did that in the second half, and it led to points. And when you look at this team as a whole, they do have talented players across the board. They were saying it during the pregame that defensively, I think it was Whitworth that was saying it, you know, to have a team that can really go further in advance, you need to have a Pro Bowler or All Pro at every level of your defense. And he said the Seahawks don't have that. And I was like, can you please hold the phone here? Because you've got Derek Hall, who's been a very exciting sophomore this year. You have Boye Mafe, that at one point had a sack in 5 consecutive games. And this is the first game back from him being injured, but he started the year 3 games, 3 sacks. You've got Leonard Williams, who got a big contract, who has been a guy that has been a huge disruptive force in the past. You have Dotson, who was PFF's like top 3 linebacker in the second half of the year, and you have 2 Pro Bowlers last year in your secondary in Julian Love and Spoon, and you
and
also have
potentially
Reek.
third. Yeah.
So when you look at this squad as a whole, if we're looking at the defensive side of it, I do think that you have the pieces. They just haven't been healthy all at the
I
same time.
I do have a
It's been musical chairs.
I
Like
do have
we're
a
at the
question.
cakewalk. We're talking about Halloween parties. You're going do 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 do
I
do trying to jump on that spot to win a cake, and we
I
ain't winning no
do
cakes right now.
I do have a question for you, and I do have in our audience. Feel free to give your opinions as well. Um,
Kane's first play towards the audience in 100 episodes.
sure. Does this team? So looking at years past, right? There's been captains, right, or leaders on both sides of the ball, right? You had Bobby for a long time, and then Legion of Boom, you basically had Cam Chancellor
Mm-hmm.
and Earl Thomas and Sherman, right? You could all consider those guys like leader types. And then offensively, Doug Baldwin for all those years. Who on this team offensively and defensively are there like vocal leaders to kind of rally around, try to get this team right? Who are those players?
Offensively, I don't think they have one right now, if
I
I'm
don't think
being
so either
completely honest, because
because it's not DK.
when you've looked when they've shown the highlights at the bench, Geno's looking a little dejected the last couple of weeks. You also have DK that looks uninspired. I
I miss Drew
do.
Lock, honestly, to be that hype man because that was Geno's guy, right? You always saw them on the sidelines together,
Okay.
and I don't
I'm
know.
I think that Geno is the guy. I
Of
think that he's
course,
been having a lot of frustrations with either his offensive line or himself the last two games. So it's been really tough to get that. Obviously, I would say if there is a guy on the offensive side of the ball that people look to, it's Tyler Lockett. But at
I
the
can
same
get with
time,
that.
the
He's
demeanor of Tyler Lockett isn't the one to get them hyped. I think that when DK's rolling, you can see him being that force on the sideline. If I'm really looking towards the future, who I think could and should be those guys, I think Kenneth Walker is a guy that would fit that role 100%.
okay.
And I think that he is being hampered a little bit by play calls and just subpar line play, which is something that we thought would have really taken a step forward. We obviously know the right tackle situation, and we saw most of the night that Nick Bosa had his way a little bit and created some disruption in the backfield. But when you look at the left side of this line, when you have Connor Williams, Laken Thompson, and Charles Cross, I expect more out of them. Charles Cross has been hands down your best offensive lineman on this team. Connor Williams has been
All right.
mediocre at best. And Laken Tomlinson has been a massive disappointment in my eyes. I think you have some growing pains that you're seeing at the right guard spot
I want to
between
know where
Bradford
George
and
Fant
Haynes,
is.
right? And I'm going to give Stone Forsythe a pass
Yeah,
because,
he's played all right.
well, here's the other thing. Stone Forsythe was not anticipated to play any snaps in the first 6 weeks. You
Hey,
brought in George Fant. He goes on IR. Abe Lucas, this team is so much better with the mountain at right tackle. When
he's
Abe Lucas is on this team, like that might low key be the guy that is the glue to this offensive side. I don't know if he's going to be the vocal guy, but when he is in the lineup, the Seahawks play a much better game.
and I don't know
And
if you get him
that
back till week
pains
10.
me so much as a UW fan, but it also doesn't, because I did talk to a guy that was on staff, got a little breakdown, loved Abe Lucas, even while he was at Wazoo, and was a guy that
Also,
I had really petitioned for them to draft when they did.
also, my wife's cousins personally know Abe Lucas, and they attest that he is a fantastic human being.
I was at Abe Lucas's high school last Friday, and
Yeah,
there was an alum that had an Abe Lucas jersey on.
that's pretty cool.
It was a Seahawks jersey. It wasn't his high school jersey, but
Heck
it was
yeah.
cool. But those, I think that he is the key. And then I think defensively, when you look at this team, I think your two guys that are going to be your vocal type leaders right now are Leonard Williams and Julian Love. I think
I
that
think
Terrell
so.
Dotson, although he is calling the defense, he is a guy that I think that the players around him respect. But I think the guy that needs to take that next step forward is Spoon, right? He's the
Yes.
guy that was drafted 5 overall. I was talking to Scott the Thought earlier, right? And he was like, Stone Forsythe isn't doing it, right? So, like, Spoon, he's a first round draft pick. Like, they should ask him to play right tackle. He's a first round draft pick. Let's do it. But I
Sure.
disagreed with that point. But I do think that he needs to start taking a more vocal thing. He is a Pro Bowler in his rookie year. He has not had as many splash plays through the first 6 weeks that he did through the first 6 weeks of last year. And I was really hoping that with Reek being out, that they would have played him. We talked about it in the last episode, played him on the outside and then done a lot more multiple defenses, bringing Tyrese Knight back on the field and running a 3 linebacker set, putting in Burns a little bit more, putting in Kayvon Wallace, putting in Kobe Bryant,
And
making
then you put
this a
Kobe
little.
Bryant in until the end of the game.
And the one thing that we all saw from the Ravens defense is how multiple and how disguised they've looked. Didn't really need it and didn't really see it the first 3 weeks, but they have not been multiple and they have not been disguising the last three, right?
Yeah.
It's
I They're
they
playing a
ran they
weird
ran heavy zone
zone.
against the Giants, and for the most part, it worked tonight. I will say that the defense did it. If you look at it as a whole, there were a couple of times that when they were put in less than favorable positions, and
except
half of the time they
for
came out on top.
except for the
So
run game because they had 200 over 200 yards rushing tonight.
they had over 200 yards rushing, but when you really look at what happened, you had the late run that put 80 yards on the board. And then when you really look outside of Trey Mason's 30-yard inconclusive run, because Trent Williams had a big old hold on Mike Morris that should have been called back. If you take those plays away, they're in a good spot. And when they were having the run game going, they held them to field goals, right? I don't care if they
There,
have 200 yards and they have 5 field goals. That's fine. But when you look at this whole thing, I thought the defense played well enough to win the game. I don't think
it's
anyone would
fair.
argue that. The offense was so anemic in the first half that it thwarted everything, and you needed a kickoff return by Laviska Shenault, which you did that. You
Jump
stop them on
started
the
it.
next one. You go and score another touchdown. I thought the Seahawks were turning the tide. And then Geno throws another interception. And then guess what? The game's over.
And that was just I there were a couple balls that Geno throws a pretty good ball most of the time. I mean, I think we can both say you'd agree with that because through the first couple of weeks with all the fluky interception stuff, he still threw a pretty good ball. But
Not
that that
tonight.
that throw that he threw to Lockett, he could have led him a little bit more.
They
Or he
were
could have threw
talking
it.
about it where Lockett was gaining ground because the guy sunk up and Geno thought he was going to be cutting straight across the field. But you
It was in
can
the end
see Lockett
zone.
moving. He throws it into a hole where there's only one guy that can catch it. When he threw that ball because his feet weren't set because Bosa was bearing down on him, not even 100%, like that's an easy incompletion if you put it on his numbers and you kick the field goal.
And
When
then there
you really
was
look at this, the Seahawks off of turnovers, that first one turned into 3 points. The latter turned into 7. That's a 10-point swing back. Now you're sitting at a lot closer game, and the game is called differently in the fourth quarter. So as much as I want to talk about how this team has underperformed, I think that this loss, although it is Geno Smith's birthday, is squarely on his shoulders because he did not put his team in a position to win this game.
and
And
let's
that's why I think that
he hasn't
we will
also
start
beat the
hearing chatter
Niners.
over the next 10 days about Sam Howell.
And there has been he has not beat the Niners. I don't think he's beat the Rams.
Nope. I would say that you are probably correct on both points.
And he's only beat the Cardinals, and I don't think we've always swept them.
That would be correct.
So in division, he's not very good.
No, and there is talent on this team.
There's a
We
lot of
we
it.
looked at this team, and ESPN even validated that. The Seahawks, when they were undefeated at 3-0, had moved from the 20s up to 4. After they lost the game to the Lions, they bumped down to 6. When they lost the game to the Giants, they bumped down to 12. Still a top half of the team in the league. And I think that they will still be an above average team. I think that this longer period is very good because you did have 3 games in 10 days and you have all guys that aren't used to it. The only guy on staff that's really used to it in their position is Leslie Frazier, who is the associate head coach. This is a guy that has been a defensive coordinator. He has been a head coach in the league. I think that Mike MacDonald, over the course of the next 7 days, particularly should be sitting with Leslie Frazier, just saying, how do we rectify this? Because Leslie Frazier was in charge of the Vikings and they had their booms and they had their busts, right? He also had his time with the Bills where they had those swoons of, even with Josh Allen, of having good streaks and bad streaks. It's the NFL, baby. And you're in a position still where you're only sitting at 0-1 in division. The Niners, who currently hold a tiebreaker over you, have 2 losses in division. So if you can somehow come out of this, win the rest of your division games, you're still going to hold that tiebreaker over the Niners. So there's a path to the playoffs still. But there are going to need to be things that need to be changed. And I don't think a ton of it is schematically defensively. I think their defense, for the most part, has played better than we've seen the last couple of years under Pete Carroll, and pick your defensive coordinator, right? And I think offensively, they're doing things to put themselves at times in a good position to win. And I
But
don't
then
think it's necessarily Brian Grubb's play calling, because, yes, they did need to run the ball more effectively and do it more often last week. I think this week they ran the run to pass was exactly what was needed to win this game, but they didn't execute in that. And when you look at the non-execution, some of it, yes, is on the offensive line, but I do think that more than not was on Geno Smith's back. He
because
had
we've seen
22
Geno get
incompletions in this game.
we've
He had
all
2
like
interceptions in this game, and both interceptions were on Geno. It wasn't
yeah,
the fluky stuff we were talking about before.
he overthrew DK and
JSN on a critical third down was WTFO. That stands for wide the open.
bleep. Yeah. So and then again, another ball to DK, and I don't know if DK was supposed to cut more or or whatnot, but just lays an egg for him. You don't win games when you turn the ball over 3 times.
No, you don't. And it was a -3 turnover differential. The one thing that you were hoping with Mike MacDonald, and you have guys that can go change the game. You have Boye Mafe, who can change the game. You have Leonard Williams that can change the game.
I
You have
also think
Reek.
he's not playing at 100% either.
You have Reek that had 6 picks in his rookie season. You have Julian Love that, as a free safety, I think is better apt to go make those big plays. You have Spoon that can make those big plays. You've got to work on turning the ball over big time with this team, because when you
Attack the
win the
ball.
turnover battle, you typically win the game. When you are -3 in the turnover battle, that explains a 12-point differential.
And then there's a big thing too where they're not attacking the football. First 3 weeks, they were piled on the
Flying,
football. They were
flying.
just tunnel vision to it. And now, like I've said, with this weird zone that they're playing, like I want to see more man coverage as well. This is a team where you need to play man coverage as well as instead of a zone.
For I would have loved to see a lot more man against the Niners, because you have a couple of guys like in that game. You have Wandell that's a little shaky. You've got Hyatt that's an over the top type of guy, but run man and let Daniel Jones try and beat you instead of just trying to find those pockets. I think
Right.
that the zone, they ran man today. I think that it was a good mix of the both, because they did have a lot of key stops. When you looked at Mason, as soon as he went out of the game, outside of the Garendo late 78-yard run, they couldn't run the ball for shit. They couldn't. You
That's
had
fair.
you had their fifth string guy that at one time popped like a 7-yarder, but I think he was 4 or less every other carry. And Garendo, before that big one, was really sitting. I think he had 1 6-yard run that put him at 6 carries for like 18 yards. But before that, like he wasn't doing anything. It was 1 to 2 yards. They were really getting stout against the run. They were making Brock Purdy uncomfortable in the pocket. He hit Brandon Ayuk 2 times in the game. You saw at points in time where Kittle got a little bit loose, and you had one big play to Debo. Juwan Jennings didn't do anything during this game. So when you look at the passing attack outside of the big play to Debo Samuel, I think that zone worked wonders,
Yeah,
and they were
I don't
able
know.
to limit the run, especially when Mason was out of the game. But the offense has to do more with their opportunities. When you looked at this game early in the fourth quarter, the Seahawks ended up going 3-and-out. They also had the play where Kenneth Walker was never set that erased a DK touchdown with over 2 minutes on the board. And it's a little bit of lack of discipline on both sides of the ball. I would say more so on the offensive side than the defensive side right now.
Hmm.
But this is a good break for them to have. This is a good, with them having the bye week in week 10, you've got 4 more games to right the ship. You have a winnable game coming up against the Falcons. Do the Falcons have weapons? Yes. Do the Seahawks have weapons? Yes. Are their defenses very similar? Yes. I think this could be a knockout, drag out game, but I'm hoping that with a little extra time, the Seahawks can really game plan this up, really get back to what
Get a little bit
more semblance
healthier.
of what we saw the first 3 weeks, where it was effective. Can you turn the ball over? That is a Mike MacDonald staple. The Ravens last year led the league in yards given up, in points, and in takeaways. We need to see the takeaways uptick, because when we see those takeaways uptick, whoever's at quarterback, because I wouldn't be shocked if Sam Howell, they're splitting reps for the next 10 days.
That would
And
make
they're letting it
sense.
play out in practice. I'm not saying he should take it over, but I'm saying
There might
I
be a
think the
competition
competition's
this week.
open.
The competition, there might be a competition for who's the starter on Sunday.
I I 100% agree.
Yeah, I would not be shocked because it's been bad.
Kane, who was your offensive player of the game?
I don't even know if you have one.
My offensive player of the game was no fan. I told you who was going to be a sneaky good player in this game. And he ended up with 6 catches for 63 yards, just off the pace. He also drew a pass interference at the 2 right before half. Like Noah Fant, I also got a text from Scott the Thought that said Noah Fant's finally earning his money.
That's true. He is. I guess K9 because K9 did play well today. Uh, I
When you
believe
sit
he was
there, he's
close to
sitting there
100,
at
100
69
total.
yards, sexy number,
Is
and a
that
tutty.
total? Is that total yards?
Yeah, pass catching and rushing.
Fair. I mean, he is a difference maker on this team. He really is. And when Kenneth Walker is being effective, the
I would have given
Seahawks,
it to Laviska Shenault if he wouldn't have fumbled.
fair. I don't know if there is one on defense outside of like Artie Burns in the first quarter when he broke up that touchdown. That was sick.
All right. Kane's all bricked up for Artie Burns.
And then he got hurt.
All bricked up. No, I will say, if I'm going to talk about someone that was the player of the game defensively, yes, he did take an ill advised route on the Debo touchdown, but Julian Love finished with 10 tackles on the day. He did have a bunch of stops short of the sticks and was all over the field. I think that he was your best defensive player, and that's why you extended him, and that's why he is playing that high safety position.
Yeah.
Rayshawn Jenkins has cooled down since the first couple weeks. I think that you've seen Terrell Dotson have a little bit more ebbs and flows throughout the game than you saw the first couple of weeks. I would like to see them incorporate Tyrese Knight a little bit more. I don't care if you're giving Dotson or Baker a blow. And Baker might have been another guy that we can consider for defensive player of the game. He
Yeah,
was around the
pretty
ball.
solid
He
game.
blew up some screens. He did some good things in this game. But I do think that Tyrese Knight has earned during those 2 weeks a little bit more playing time, whether that's spelling a guy, because he flies around the field. And you might even throw something in there to old Nehemiah Pritchett defensively. He came
Yep.
in, you have Reek Woolen, who's your outside corner, and you did see Spoon play a little bit more outside after he went out. But Nehemiah Pritchett, to my watching of the game, did not give up a completion. And he had a big stop on a fourth down or a third down.
And also, before Trey Brown went out, he was not very good.
He wasn't that bad though either.
It wasn't. I wasn't impressed. I saw him slipping and sliding
It
out
was a
there.
typical Trey Brown game where he didn't make that game-changing play. He made enough plays that limited them. He did give up what, a penalty and they maybe one first down catch, but he played an all right game. And then when
No,
he
I
went
think
out
they
with
picked
the
that. I
injury,
think they picked it up. I think they picked it up.
they did
On
pick that one up actually. So I would say that Trey Brown had a fine game.
I don't know. I just negative
Fru-
Nancy tonight, man.
Frustrated like a Mariners fan. What do you know? Cane's in the building.
Yep.
But don't worry. You've got the Kraken that started. They're 0-1. Let's
Yeah. Next game's on Saturday.
It is. And there's another game at Saturday. The UW Huskies play Big Noon,
Are
which is
they
noon Eastern time, 9 a.m. game at Iowa.
are they
And
ranked yet?
they who?
The Huskies. Did they break?
No, they did not break the rankings with their 2 losses. I think if they win this game against Iowa, they might find their way into the top 25 just barely. Quick programming note. We're recording this tonight because there wasn't a good time. We've got some personal things that are going in, tentatively planning something for next Wednesday or next Thursday, probably talking about the Huskies. There'll be a lot that we might be able to break down because we kind of want to know who they are. They've won all their games at home. When they talk about a road game against WSU and at Rutgers, they lost. So it's going to be really interesting to see what they do at Iowa, which is a stout defense. And if the Huskies can muster up like 17 points, they're probably in the clear. So it's going to be really interesting to see what that breakdown looks like. And we'll talk about that in the future here. But you've got this long break. You have where let's talk about the Falcons. Bijan Robinson, who has been sporadically in and out of the lineup. You're seeing with Kirk Cousins a little bit more stuff go towards Kyle Pitts and Drake London offensively. Their defense plays well enough, just like the Seahawks. I think this is going to be a battle of 2 very similar type teams
Mhm.
a week from Sunday. And you're hoping that Trey Brown, Reek Woolen are back. You're hoping that Byron Murphy is back because I do think that he is a difference maker in the middle for this team, even though there's not a ton of stats. And you're hoping that this offense can work some things out a little bit more in this little bit mini bye that they've got going forward. So there's a lot of things going on with Seattle sports, and we're going to be here every step of the way.
It's true.
And it's true that you should follow us on social media. You can find me, your boy, Coach Red, over on X at the Real Coach Red, on Instagram at the Real _ Coach Red, TikTok at the Real Coach Red. Also follow the show over on YouTube. Search Kicking It with Coach Red. Like, subscribe, hit the bell notifications, and leave a comment or two. Kane, where you at?
You can find me on Twitter at Kane2406, TikTok, Kane0624. Also follow the show's socials over on Twitter and Instagram at Coach Red Pod. False. Do it. Freaking do it.
And as always, stay fresh.
Stay fresh, peeps.
Peace.